Palestine Action have asked the High Court to stop Keir Starmer's government from banning them as a terrorist organisation. It comes as the pro-Palestine movement is on the verge of being proscribed after their campaign of actions against weapons factories and other businesses linked to Israel's arms industry. Joining me to discuss this are my colleagues John McAvoy and Alex Morris, who've been investigating this extensively. We're recording this on Tuesday morning and it's an incredibly fast-moving story. John, can you talk us through just what's happened in the last 24 hours?
Yeah, for sure. So in the past 24 hours, we've seen the proscription order come from the Home Office for Palestine Action, which we expected, of course, because last Monday, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, announced that she was intending to, propose this ban on Palestine Action. But what's taken a lot of people off guard, I think, is that she's included two other organisations for proscription within this order. One of which is called the Maniac Murder Cult, and the other is called the Russian Imperial Movement. And the Murder Maniac Cult is a neo-Nazi organisation, which one of the leaders of which was found to be trying to get someone dressed up as Santa Claus to hand out toxic sweets to children. And the Russian Imperial Movement wants to kind of re-establish the Russian Empire. Is also aligned with far-right activists. Now, the purpose of doing this seems to be, quite childish in my opinion. Effectively, what Yvette Cooper wants is to kind of hand out this proscription order. And if anybody opposes it, then, the government's response will be, what, do you support the Maniac's Murder Cult or do you support, the Russian Imperial Movement? So basically, she's lumped in these kind of neo-Nazi organisations with Palestine Action, which is totally absurd. In order to make it difficult for MPs to actually voice opposition to this order.
But they should be proscribed group. There are menace to society. They're traitors.
And John, can you tell us about who's been pushing for this ban on Palestine Action behind the scenes?
I think the Labour government, the increasingly kind of authoritarian side of Keir Starmer, has kind of wanted a reason to, ban Palestine Action under some kind of legislation for a long time. And I think the government probably expected that, the kind of shock of the event at Brize Norton, they would be able to rush through this prescription ban quite easily. But now that civil society has come out against it, they've started to kind of, use some of the narratives that have been deployed by the pro-Israel lobby in Britain to kind of like rush it through by other means, by kind of innuendo that Palestine Action is funded by Iran. And the main organisation that's been pushing this narrative, that organisation is We Believe in Israel. The former director, Luke Akehurst, is now a Labour MP. He was kind of parachuted into Durham by Keir Starmer. This organisation has been, saying that, Palestine Action uses narratives or discourse that aligns with the IRGC. They haven't actually been able to, conjure up any evidence at all. But yeah, so we Believe in Israel has effectively, provided some of the ammunition in terms of discourse that Yvette Cooper's Home Office is now using to justify, after the fact, the planned proscription of Palestine Action.
And just to add to what John's been saying, Haroon Sadiq in The Guardian at the weekend did an article where he basically showed how part of the government's statement when they announced the proscription order last week was lifted from this report written by We Believe in Israel. Lots of similar discourse, he says. Now, when I looked at this report on the We Believe in Israel website, there was something quite particular about the formatting of it, and from the emojis that they used, it reminded me of the legal kind of reports that you get from ChatGPT when you ask it to write you a legal argument. And I ran it through an AI detector, and it said 40% of this report was written by AI. I don't know which bits the government took, but specifically the legal arguments that We Believe in Israel had put into this report, which they then obviously used to lobby the Home Office, appears to be written in part by AI. So these organizations, they want to influence government, and they can't even be bothered to write a 600 to 800 word report in their own words. Do they really believe, what they're actually saying?
And one of the very interesting things that came out of the Guardian report that Alex just mentioned, in fact, was that We Believe in Israel claimed in its kind of initial statement, which it's now edited to remove this part, but it initially claimed that it had been privy to a confidential Metropolitan Police report from 2022, which which suggested that Palestine Action was being investigated under the Terrorism Act for alleged links to Hamas-aligned groups in Europe. Now, the massive question now is, why on earth is We Believe in Israel, which at the time would have been under the directorship of Luke Akehurst, being given access to supposedly confidential Metropolitan Police reports? This is a major, major concern, and it's little surprise that We Believe in Israel has now removed that reference from its website, because it suggests a serious amount of collaboration between the British authorities and a pro-Israel lobby group.
It is amazing how easily these evidence-free narratives get taken up by the media. Listen to what this journalist asked the Home Secretary as she left Downing Street last week.
Is Iran funding Palestine Action?
Another media outlet that's really pushing this narrative about Palestine Action's supposed links to Iran is the Times newspaper. Now, they've done a series of stories. None of them really have any evidence. So, for example, they say they can reveal the organisation's close links to the Islamic Human Rights Commission, IHRC, believed by British officials to have direct ties to Iran. Since the announcement about Palestine Action's proscription, the IHRC has repeatedly posted on social media its support for Palestine Action. But when the Times approached the IHRC about whether it funded Palestine Action, it said, "While we support the aims and objectives of the group, namely opposition to the crimes of Israel, we have not provided them with any financial or material support." And the IHRC, although it has a rather grand name, is effectively a bookshop in Wembley. It organises talks and an annual protest. But this seems to be the best link that the Times newspaper, with all its resources and all its journalists, can find to try and smear Palestine Action by linking it to Iran. Huda Amori Group's co-founder has said that they get donations from the public, averaging around £30 or £40 for their latest crowdfunder that's for that High Court challenge against their proscription. John, isn't it rather ironic that these journalists are trying to say Palestine Action is linked to Iran, and yet they don't seem to be throwing any light or investigating the links that Israel or pro-Israel lobby groups have behind this proscription?
Yeah, I mean, they're totally scraping the bottom of the barrel, aren't they? I mean, they're saying that Palestine Action is linked to an organisation which British officials who are unnamed say is linked to Iran, but not specifically what even Iran it's linked to. I mean, this is really the lowest form of journalism, I think. And one of the profound ironies of all of this is that, you know, in its last public list, Yvette Cooper was listed as a parliamentary supporter of Labour Friends of Israel. Now, Labour Friends of Israel, as many of our listeners will know, is a pro-Israel lobby organisation in Britain which doesn't disclose its sources of funding. Yet a few years ago, Al Jazeera published a real groundbreaking documentary. And in one of the scenes, you had the chair of Labour Friends of Israel, Joan Ryan, was discussing with an Israeli embassy official a payment of £1 million.
What happened with the names that we put into the embassy,
And just now got the money. It's more than £1 million. It's a lot of money. And then, and now I got it.
Now, Labour Friends of Israel has never properly clarified what that payment was for, but it really gave you a kind of taste of the close ties between the Israeli embassy and these kind of Israel lobby organisations in Britain. Now, Yvette Cooper is a supporter of this organisation, yet she's briefing the press, you know, the British press, without any evidence whatsoever that Palestine Action is funded by Iran.
There's clearly very little understanding of how these social movements work among the British press. They think they've got a gotcha question. Who funds Palestine Action? How much money do you need? When all the activists are volunteers, they've got spray paint, they've got buckets of paint, they've got stencils, they might have a few basic tools to, you know, get into the factories and smash a few windows. That really doesn't take much money. And as as Phil mentioned, with the the fundraiser, the legal fundraiser, average donation £35. You know, they do a fundraiser every few months and they get the money to do the basic sort of activism that they do.
Alex, you've also been looking into the Terrorism Act and what it has to say about criminal damage, whether that can be construed as a form of terrorism. Can you tell us a little bit more about just how unprecedented it is for a government to use counterterrorism law against a protest group that is non-violent?
Yeah, so I was just going through the government statement that they put out last week, this statement where they announced their intention to proscribe Palestine Action. And even in the first sentence, it says, Palestine Action has a long history of unacceptable criminal damage. So criminal damage is not terrorism, firstly. And literally the next sentence, the UK's defence enterprise is vital to the nation's national security. So in the first sentence, they say, okay, it's criminal damage, and this is about our defence enterprise, primarily protecting the profits of weapons companies. But this is a key section. So when it comes to the Terrorism Act 2000, they say, Palestine Action has committed acts of serious damage to property with the aim of progressing its political cause and influence the government. So that sentence references two specific bits in the Terrorism Act. Okay, the first bit is serious damage to property. So there is, as part of the definition of terrorism in the Terrorism Act, part of that is damage to property, which tells you a lot about the state of British capitalism, that part of the Terrorism Act protects commercial properties and goods and assets. From all of our research, we couldn't find any instances where damage to property in terms of the Terrorism Act and terrorism laws had been used to prosecute someone. Someone may come up in the comments and tell us there has been something, but related to the Terrorism Act, there's no precedent, there's no legal precedent in terms of someone actually going to prison or being jailed for damage to property. So this is certainly unprecedented. And the second part is about the aim of progressing a political cause. Now, most people would understand terrorism as coercive violence, public intimidation to progress a political cause. They've already faced charges of criminal damage, of aggravated burglary, things like that. These do not come under the Terrorism Act. And I think most people involved in Palestine Action would say it's not a political cause necessarily. I mean, most people would understand it as a moral duty to stop genocide. What political cause are they furthering? They're trying to say, we need to stop these weapons from going from Britain to Israel to stop genociding the Palestinian people.
Yeah, and as Alex was saying, I think it's important to note that, within the Terrorism Act in Britain, the UK has adopted an incredibly loose definition of terrorism that it does not comply with kind of general international standards. And this very issue was brought up by the UN Special Rapporteur on Terrorism, Ben Saul, when he intervened in the case of the Filton 18. And what he said was that best practice international definitions of terrorism limit such conduct to criminal acts intended to cause death, serious personal injury, or hostage taking in order to intimidate a population or compel a government to do or to abstain from doing any act. So that's quite clear there. Cause death, serious personal injury, or hostage taking. Obviously, Palestine Action's activities don't cover any of these and don't even come close to it. So the UK government is really abusing a false definition of terrorism in order to clamp down on civil society organisations.
I've also seen people questioning the impact that this will have on terrorism legislation. If you include a group like Palestine Action, does that mean that people will stop taking these laws seriously? Next week, it's the 20th anniversary of the 7/7 terrorist attack in London, in which people on buses and tubes were blown up by suicide bombers. That was clearly an act of terrorism. Is it an insult to those victims to include a group which poured paint on a plane as it sat empty on a runway? Thanks, John and Alex, for joining me to discuss this incredibly important issue. If you're watching this and you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please hit the button below. Thanks to your support, we've now passed 150,000 subscribers. And if you're able to support our work financially, you can make a donation through the Super Thanks button below. Thanks for watching.